Imagine a war ends tomorrow. Peace treaties are signed, the shooting stops, the politicians take their, victory laps on international television, and the world just breathes this massive sigh of relief.
Right, the conflict is over.
Exactly, it's over. But then the mathematical models show your grocery bill is still going to double over the next 6 months anyway.
Yeah,
The cost of the microchips in your laptop will absolutely skyrocket, and the pharmaceutical supply chain that keeps your local pharmacy stocked, it'll basically grind to a near halt.
it's terrifying, honestly.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today we are looking at the unstoppable inertial momentum of global supply chains. We're going to explore why the real danger of modern geopolitical conflict isn't just the dramatic cinematic event on the battlefield.
No, it's the grinding of the gears that follows.
Yes. Today's deep dive is an exploration of this fascinating, highly detailed, multidisciplinary source document that predicts the global fallout of a hypothetical but very realistic Middle Eastern conflict scenario. And it's unique because it doesn't just look at military maneuvers, right?
Exactly. I mean, in a world of constant information overload, we tend to fixate on the visible chaos, the troop movements, the diplomatic summits, the immediate flashpoints.
This stuff on cable news.
Right, exactly. But what is truly valuable here is synthesizing the hidden wiring of the global system. This analysis combines geopolitical doctrine, international law, historical precedent, and hardcore supply chain economics to assign actual hard percentage probabilities to various global outcomes.
Which is so rare to see. We aren't just looking at what might happen, but why it matters and how likely it actually is. So here is the structure of our conversation today. We have 5 geopolitical scenarios and 5 specific economic disruption scenarios mapped out in the sources.
And we are going to unpack all of them.
All of them, starting with what the data says is almost mathematically guaranteed to happen and working our way down to the geopolitical pipe dreams. So whether you're trying to understand your stock portfolio or you're wondering why cooking gas prices might just randomly spike, or if you're just insanely curious about global power dynamics, this deep dive will connect those dots for you.
It really will, because the predictive models assign an 85% probability, which they classify as a very high likelihood, to a scenario where Asia faces a grueling 6-month economic misery period due to this inertial momentum.
85%. I mean, let's skip the unlikely stuff for a second and start right there with the most alarming statistic in the entire document. Why start here? Because this damage is already baked in, regardless of what politicians do next, right?
What's fascinating here is that the physical and financial damage of a regional shock simply cannot be undone the moment a ceasefire is signed.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Asian economies specifically hit are India, China, Japan, and the Asian countries. And why? Because they rely on the Middle East for over 60% of their energy. But it's not just the physical oil, it's the financial side. It comes down to maritime law and insurance.
Right. Maritime insurance markets have a very long memory. When we talk about shipping lanes in the Middle East, we are essentially talking about Lloyd's of London, the epicenter of global maritime insurance.
Right.
Their Joint War Committee designates specific bodies of water as listed areas when risk elevates. And when a region like the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea becomes a listed area, standard marine insurance is immediately voided for any vessel entering those waters.
Wow, just instantly voided.
Instantly. It's known as a breach of warranty. So to keep moving cargo, ship owners are forced to purchase supplementary war risk premiums. And these premiums, they aren't just a flat fee.
Right, they're tied to the ship's value or something?
Exactly. They're calculated as a percentage of the vessel's total hull value, charged per week, sometimes per voyage. We are talking about millions of dollars in unexpected operating costs added to a single transit.
And those actuaries sitting in London, I mean, they don't just drop their rates the second a politician holds a press conference saying the shooting has stopped.
They absolutely don't. Their risk models are based on physical reality, not political rhetoric. If you look at the historical precedent from the source, like the tanker war in the 1980s, or the recent Houthi Red Sea crisis war, risk premiums remain highly elevated for months after actual hostilities ceased.
Because the risk is still there.
Right. A ceasefire doesn't magically sweep the ocean of unexploded ordnance, and it doesn't neutralize rogue actors who might just ignore the treaty.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It's like slamming the brakes on a massive, fully loaded freight train.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. You hit the brakes, which represents the ceasefire, but the sheer physics and momentum carry that train forward for another mile, violently crushing supply chains along the way before it finally comes to a complete halt.
Yeah, and that delayed stopping distance is the economic lag. Every single week, those premiums stay elevated. That cost gets passed down the chain until it doubles the price of consumer goods on the shelf. And the physical reality from the text makes this even worse.
You mean the infrastructure damage?
Exactly. Destroyed loading terminals and refineries take anywhere from 6 to 18 months to rebuild. You can't negotiate with a destroyed terminal.
You can't fast-track the curing of industrial concrete.
Right. And while you wait for those custom parts to be fabricated and installed, the supply of energy or chemicals that terminal use to output is simply gone from the global market.
Which brings us to the visual distribution graph in the source material. It breaks down exactly what this 85% probability looks like on the ground through 5 specific supply chain disruptions. Let's explore these, starting with the LTG supply crisis, which sits at a 95% probability.
Yes, LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas. It is a fundamental pillar of daily life in the developing world.
Right, because people conflate natural gas, but LPG is specifically domestic cooking gas.
Exactly, and domestic cooking gas in India and China relies heavily on the Strait of Hormuz. The vast majority is transported via very large gas carriers. When an inertial supply shock hits that specific maritime choke point, they have to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope.
Which doubles the transit time and cripples the freight rates. And for emerging market governments, this forces a brutal sovereign debt dilemma. They heavily subsidize this gas to maintain social stability.
Right, so if the price triples, the government either absorbs that massive cost, exploding their national deficit, or they pass it on to the consumer. And passing on means people choose between cooking meals and paying rent, which triggers domestic unrest.
It's a lose-lose. Okay, next disruption. A fertilizer production halt, also at 95%. I've got to ask, why is fertilizer so vulnerable to a Middle East conflict?
Well, modern agriculture is entirely dependent on complex chemical synthesis to create nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers. And this process requires immense amounts of liquefied natural gas and elemental sulfur.
Oh, and the Persian Gulf is the premier exporter of those raw inputs.
Exactly. If the Gulf stops shipping LNG and sulfur, the global fertilizer industry loses its primary inputs almost overnight.
And the terrifying part is the time delay. If farmers can't afford fertilizer during their planting window, you don't feel the pain immediately. You feel it 6 to 9 months later when the global harvest comes in 20% below expectations.
Right, it creates a multi-year food inflation cycle.
Okay, the third disruption is API exports at 90%. This one genuinely surprised me. API, meaning active pharmaceutical ingredients. How does a regional conflict stop the global medicine supply?
It's startling, I know. But the pharmaceutical industry is heavily reliant on foundational petrochemicals, the basic building blocks for countless medications, like paracetamol or broad-spectrum antibiotics, often begin as benzene or phenol derivatives refined in Middle Eastern petrochemical plants.
And generic drug manufacturers in India run on incredibly thin margins, right?
Exactly. They import these raw chemical precursors in massive bulk quantities. When maritime insurance premiums double the shipping costs and the raw material spike in price, these manufacturers face immediate margin compression.
They physically can't produce the drugs at the contracted price points.
Right. So we get severe logistical choke points, back orders on life-saving drugs, and ultimately massive healthcare cost spikes worldwide.
Wow. Okay, let's look at the fourth one. An 80% probability of a chip wafer slowdown. Now, I've got to push back a little here. Wait, computer chips. How does a Middle East conflict stop a microchip? Taiwan and South Korea make the chips, and they are nowhere near the Middle East.
That is the logical assumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the secret bottleneck here is ultra-pure helium.
Helium, like for balloons?
Well, a much purer form, yes.
Yeah.
Manufacturing chip wafers requires extreme thermal control. Helium has the lowest boiling point of any element, making it the only gas capable of cooling the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines used in advanced chip fabrication.
And where does this ultra-pure helium come from?
A massive percentage of it is extracted as a byproduct of natural gas processing in the Middle East, specifically from Qatar's North Field.
Oh, wow. So if shipping in the Persian Gulf is disrupted, the semiconductor foundries lose their coolant.
Exactly. A total halt is prevented only because the industry maintains strategic reserves, but those are finite. As costs soar and supply dwindles, foundries are forced to slow down production lines.
So your laptop literally relies on cryogenic gas flowing out of Qatar. That is wild. This brings us to the fifth metric, a 75% probability of an economic slowdown.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, all these individual failures culminate in pervasive macroeconomic decay.
The source specifically mentions the Nifty Y50 index in India. So, how does this stall the India growth story? Even if their long-term demographics are incredibly strong, what happens in the near term?
Well, this combination of shocks leads to widening deficits, massive inflation, and corporate margin hits. During a geopolitical crisis, institutional investors flee emerging market equities, like the Nifty Y50, and rush toward safe haven assets like the US dollar.
Which depreciates the local currency, making all those imports even more expensive.
Exactly. It solves the India growth story for several quarters, if not years.
Okay, so if Asian economies are taking the absolute worst of this 85% guaranteed economic hit, why wouldn't the two biggest Asian superpowers, China and India, step in militarily? I mean, why wouldn't they pick a definitive side to end it?
That is the perfect question to ask, and it moves us from economic effects to superpower geopolitics.
Right. So let's look at scenario 4, which gives a 25% so, a moderate low probability of a proxy world war where China provides tactical targeting intel to Iran.
And 25% is still a significant number when we are talking about global conflict.
It is, but let me play devil's advocate here based on the text. If China's whole grand strategy is to degrade U.S. power, isn't a distracted, bleeding U.S. military bogged down in the Middle East exactly what Beijing wants? Why wouldn't they just provide satellite coordinates to the IRGC to sink U.S. assets?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to contrasting U.S. and Chinese macro energy realities. The U.S. is essentially energy independent due to the shale revolution.
Right.
China, on the other hand, is the world's largest oil importer. Their entire economy requires an uninterrupted ocean of imported hydrocarbons.
So their vulnerabilities are totally asymmetrical.
Completely. And the historical precedent here is vital. Unlike the USSR and the USA fighting proxy wars in Afghanistan or Vietnam during the Cold War places that weren't the bedrock of their domestic economies, China views the Middle East strictly as a gas station.
Not a theater for a proxy war.
Exactly, it's a gas station. And a burning gas station destroys China's economy. They cannot afford to burn down the resource node that keeps their factories running.
Okay, so if they aren't going to hand over satellite coordinates, what will China actually do with that 25% probability?
Well, they will provide diplomatic cover at the UN Security Council. They will buy Iranian oil via teapot refineries to bypass U.S. sanctions.
Wait, teapot refineries? What are those?
They are small, independent, non-state-owned refineries in China. Because they're domestic, they don't rely on the U.S. dollar or the SWIFT banking network, making them immune to U.S. secondary sanctions.
Oh, that's clever. They use a shadow fleet of aging tankers to bring the oil in under the radar.
Exactly. And they might also supply dual-use drone parts or commercial LiDAR systems. But providing real-time tactical intel crosses a massive U.S. red line, risking a hot war that collapses China's own energy supply chain.
So they play it safe. So if China's playing it safe, what about India? The source gives a mere 5% chance of India entirely siding with either the USA or Iran.
Yes, and this is deeply rooted in India's foundational diplomatic doctrine. Strategic autonomy or multi-alignment.
Strategic autonomy. So how does India practically balance this when the pressure from both sides would be immense?
It's a delicate tightrope. The source outlines their conflicting needs perfectly. India absolutely needs the U.S. for defense tech transfers, foreign direct investment, and countering China via the Quad Alliance.
They need that Western money and security.
Right. But simultaneously, India needs Iran for civilizational ties and, crucially, the strategic Chabahar port.
Chabahar Port. This is crucial because India is physically blocked from land access to Central Asia by Pakistan, right?
Yes, exactly. Chabahar port in Iran is India's multi-billion-dollar workaround to access Central Asian and Russian markets. To join a U.S. coalition against Iran means surrendering this vital geopolitical gateway.
They just can't do it. And the historical precedent proves this, right? Look at India's neutrality on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
It's the exact same playbook. They bought discounted Russian oil while maintaining ties with the U.S. In a Middle East crisis, India will issue statements, they will mediate, and they will protect their massive diaspora in the Gulf, but they will absolutely refuse a military coalition.
Okay, so the global superpowers are staying at arm's length to protect their economies. But what about the countries physically caught in the crossfire? And what about the international courts designed to police this exact kind of chaos?
Right, to local neighborhood.
Yeah, let's talk about scenario 3. A 15% probability of Gulf countries unanimously evicting Western military bases. The logic in the text is called the cascade, right?
Yes, the cascade logic.
Iranian missiles overfly Gulf airspace, the local populations get restless, and the monarchies realize U.S. bases are just massive magnets for Iranian fire, so they kick the U.S. out to appease Iran. I mean, it makes logical sense on paper.
This raises an important question, though, because you have to introduce game theory and the security dilemma.
The security dilemma.
Right. While Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are hedging bets, joining BRICS and normalizing ties with Iran in 2023, they have a fatal vulnerability.
Which is?
Their domestic militaries fundamentally rely on U.S. Patriot and THAAD missile defense systems to protect their airspace and refineries.
Oh, so kicking out the U.S. from Al Udeid in Qatar or NSA Bahrain because they might attract fire is like firing your heavily armed bodyguard right as a mob surrounds your house?
That is the perfect analogy. You absolutely need his body armor to survive the night. A unanimous eviction leaves them at the mercy of Iranian hegemony.
So a full eviction is off the table. What's the compromise then?
The likely compromise is that the Gulf states will restrict the U.S. from using these bases for offensive strikes against Iran. They will say, your defensive umbrella can stay, but you can't fly bomber sorties from our runways.
That threads the needle perfectly. Okay, this brings us to the final, least likely scenario. Scenario 2. A 2% probability, basically practically zero, of the U.S. and Israel paying billions in ICJ war reparations to Iran.
Yes, the International Court of Justice.
The cascade here is that Iran files a case at the ICJ, they win, but the U.S. and Israel just refuse to pay. Why is an international court ruling given a practically 0% chance of actually being enforced?
Well, you have to break down the mechanics of international law. The ICJ can issue condemnations and legally binding rulings, but its enforcement mechanism relies entirely on the UN Security Council.
And there is the obvious roadblock. The U.S. holds veto power on the Security Council.
Exactly. The ICJ has no police force. If a state refuses to comply, you go to the Security Council, and the U.S. will just veto any resolution demanding they pay reparations.
And the historical precedent proves this isn't just theory, right?
Yes. Look at the 1986 case, Nicaragua v. United States. Yeah. The ICJ ordered the U.S. to pay reparations for mining Nicaraguan harbors.
And what was the U.S. response?
They simply withdrew from compulsory ICJ jurisdiction and blocked the UN enforcement resolution.
Wow. And I want to be incredibly clear here, maintaining total impartiality. Regardless of anyone's political leanings or the moral arguments of the combatants, the mechanical reality is that sovereign funds will never be allocated to rebuild Iran under international pressure due to these veto mechanics.
Right. It's just a structural reality of the system.
So what does this all mean? We've covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have. And if we pull all these threads together, the overarching theme revealed by the sources is that in modern geopolitical crises, military and legal escalations like World War III or ICJ reparations are mathematically far less likely than devastating, slow-moving economic consequences.
The inertial momentum.
Exactly. And that is why the listeners should care. Global conflicts are no longer isolated events you just watch on the news.
Right.
Because of how interwoven supply chains are, a localized conflict directly dictates the price of your cooking gas, the availability of your prescription medications, and the cost of the microchips in your next car.
It's all connected, which brings me to a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to ponder. Building strictly on the facts we discussed, if a 6-month economic hangover is an 85% mathematical certainty due to inertial momentum, and the India grift story has a 75% chance of stalling due to these maritime choke points, how will global supply chains fundamentally restructure themselves? If the Middle East is a gas station that keeps catching fire, how long until the biggest customers decide they need to build a completely new station entirely?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.